How's it going? And welcome to episode 201 of On the Wire, proud member, the Pitcher List Podcast Network. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me pretty much everywhere at 80 grade. Follow Kevin Hasting, either at Hasting Kevin or at Chasing Wins, depending on where you're following. But most likely you follow both of us in the Pitcher List Discord channels, up and down all the channels there, especially as we are heading into February now, Kevin. The talk and the chatter is just, it's coming to a head, and it's amazing because we all have a lot more to talk about. Pieces are getting in place. We're gonna have a lot of news to talk about on this episode, and we got a whole slew of new Pitcher List coworkers joining the crew in the last 2 weeks as well. So it is very active in the Discord. Good to see you we're live, we're streaming. We've got a couple of people watching us over on YouTube, but in a non PitchCon panel type of setting. How you doing? How's it been?
I'm doing well, Adam. How are you doing this week?
I've been better. If I'm being honest, no, I feel good.
I'm sorry to catch you off guard there.
Yeah,
spinning that around on you. You seemed a little.
You usually ask me questions, Kevin. That's not cool.
Yeah.
No,
it's been great, and you're exactly right. All of the baseball talk, and we'll have even more here in a few days after this one last football game gets played today for most people listening. And this is just an amazing time of year. So much talk and so much more information coming in by the day. You mentioned right before we started recording, we have V3 of the PLV rankings out. The Bad X came out last week. We had ATC update this week. I mean, there's all kinds of things we can be looking at, and too many things actually. We won't be able to look at everything we want to. It's that time of year.
It really is that point where you're just like, there's too much. Like you have to pick and choose, and I appreciate those who have chosen to listen to us for whatever reason, week in and week out as we roll out these category previews. We are going to continue on that with our opportunity section, where we look at batting average and plate appearances and just opportunity that players might have throughout the course of the season that changes week to week. 1 week player you're not even considering, all of a sudden they find themselves in a great opportunity, whether they're hitting in course for 4 days or there's an injury and then they're called upon to take up the bulk of the load at their position, whatever the case may be. A lot of things can change, but there's too much, really, and which is an amazing thing to be able to say, is like the amount, not only the amount of content, but the amount of quality content that is being put forth across so many different platforms in our industry, specifically for fantasy baseball, I'm enamored by it. It's just amazing.
It's so much fun. I talk about other podcasts all the time because I listen to so many, and I've mentioned many times one of my favorites is Van and Steve, Wins Above Fantasy. One of my other favorites, Bubba and the Bloom. And then, so Ryan Bloomfield was on Wins Above Fantasy this week. Amazing show. Check that out if you have not yet. All right, we lost Adam. I think he might have lost power. Apologies here. We'll get this straightened out for those of you joining us live. There he is. He's back.
I swear,
I actually remembered to continue talking when you were gone this time because of the stream. Last time I just sat here in silence.
I swear all I did was hit the comment section. Apparently, StreamYard does not want me commenting with all the with any comments that are coming through. So
we got Nick out there commenting.
Yeah, I saw that. That's where I was trying to respond to Nick, but that's fine. Anyway, where'd you leave off then, Kevin?
I just explained that I was going to keep talking because last time I didn't, when you might have lost power or signal there for a second.
Well,
hadn't dove into anything yet.
Those watching live can see how the magic is made, but now you can know that I have to try to figure out how to piecemeal all this out and in into the next section. All right. Well, with all the information that's out there, great. We're gonna throw even more at you on this episode. We're gonna start with a whole bunch of news because we know what we took the news section off from the last episode, Kevin. So we got a lot to bullet point through and kind of it's a lot of smaller stuff, but there's a lot of it. It's volume over substance. But let's start with the big one here. Let's just get it out of the way. Pete Alonso does end up returning to the New York Mets on a 2-year deal. Something tells me that's a little bit less years than he was wanting or expected to get. But there was a lot of speculation on a couple of players that might be fighting for either reps at first base or at third base. But with Pete Alonso back at least for the next 2 years, I think does he have an opt-out clause in after the year one? Or I might be thinking of Jack Flaherty, who we'll get to later. But either way, he's there for at least 2025, if not through his 2 years on his contract. What does this do for any speculation that you might have been making for the remainder of the Mets lineup?
I think it means Brett Beatty. I had seen him as a popular late round spec ad because they hadn't added a third baseman, and we
Right.
thought Mark Vientos would be moving to first base. That's out the window now. So hopefully those were FAAB leagues where you were drafting Brett Beatty, in my opinion, at this point. I think that's the biggest issue. Pete Alonso right back into his 3 spot. And I think we're going to see, with the addition of Juan Soto, now that's been so long ago. Like a couple of times recently, I've forgotten Juan Soto was a Met, right?
It was one of
So
those
I
big
think
ones that actually happened early.
helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, that helps the RBI numbers for Alonso. He's one of these power hitters that we expect a very volatile batting average. We've seen as good as 271. We've seen as bad as 217. He kind of split the difference in 2024 at 240. If I'm drafting Pete Alonso, I'm really hoping he gets on the higher end of that, as we're concentrating, or I am trying to concentrate more on my ratios this season. But I mean, other than if a 240 batting average concerns you, you know exactly what you're getting from Pete Alonso, and maybe a little better in the RBI category than we've seen the last couple seasons.
Yeah, I was gonna say this anyway, but Uncle Ted comes in here and name drops Luis Acuna. I know his name was being thrown around as fighting for third base opportunity here. My first thought was that Acuna doesn't make the roster with Alonso back in the mix, but Roster Resource has him making the roster, at least on the bench. Not in a platoon, but just like as a bench player. I don't see Acuna being a bench player. Like he's just not, he doesn't seem to be the type that ends up just being a filler. At the very least, he's a short side of a platoon situation, or he starts in the minors and gets the first call up when they need something filling due to injury or due to, underperformance or anything like that. Any additional thoughts on Acuna?
Yeah, I would be worried that he starts the season in the minors. I mean, he was already only projected for a little over 200 plate appearances, and some were starting to speculate he could take that third base job. And so there was some of that out there, but just now there's not room. Mark Vientos is playing every day. Pete Alonso is playing every day. Um, he's not, and no, and Uncle Ted's bringing up Beatty. No, Beatty's neither one of them. I think are on this roster. If Acuna is, it's as a utility guy because he can play a little outfield as well. But no, I don't see this. And I do not see Vientos as a DH very often, as is also being presented in the chat here. That's what they went and signed Jesse Winker for, at least against righties. So maybe he gets short side platoon work as a DH once in a while, not necessarily at third base. But this really hurts both Beatty and Acuna, whichever one you thought was going to get that time at third, because only one of them was. Yeah, this roster's full.
Yeah. And I just don't see, like I said, I don't see Acuna being on a roster where he's not playing the majority of the time, if not every day. So
Right.
yeah, I agree. I think he starts down in AAA. Plus, the Mets are going to want to at least hold him back for a couple weeks to, gain that, because he was up for like a couple weeks at the end of last season. So in order to keep that eligibility for an extra year, they've got to hold him down for probably about a month or two. Anyway. Time manipulation is a thing, people. It's still out there.
It really is. Yep.
A couple smaller deals, and I want to get your take on which one of these could actually make a difference with with Arizona. Trey Mancini trying his hand at a comeback here with a minor league deal with Arizona. And to pair with it, Randall Grichuk returns to Arizona as well. Which one of these guys will have more plate appearances as a Diamondback in 2025?
That's a great question.
Because Grichuk, I mean, we talked about Grichuk in the past. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Grichuk because he will get those short side platoon at bats. He over the past couple of seasons, we've talked about him fairly often in season on our FAAB show. When there's lefties coming up, we've been pretty big on Randall Grichuk, and he has performed. Mm-hmm. So I would expect him to just continue in that role, and that means that I really don't see much here for Mancini. Mm-hmm. Still somebody that I think most of us are rooting for.
Sure.
Right now, Roster Resource doesn't even have him on the opening day roster. He is a non-roster invitee, and yeah, I hope he makes a team, but I'm not planning on it. He's 32 years old now. We haven't seen, and this was pre-cancer and all of that, but we haven't seen a big year out of Trey Mancini since 2019, and there was
that was the year.
A ball that was helping out at that time, right? So if you look back to 2021 when he first came back, right? A little over 600 plate appearances, the 21 home runs, 70-70 there, 77 runs, 71 RBI, no stolen bases, but a decent batted average, 255. But that was 4 years ago, and he hasn't been near these numbers since. So I'm kind of worried we may not see Trey Mancini much, if at all, at the major league level any longer. But like I said, I think he's somebody we're all rooting for.
Yeah, absolutely. Grichuk is just he's going to come up a lot in this opportunity section throughout the season.
Right.
When you see all those lefties, he's kind of a perfect name to have signed.
I almost used him for later in the show tonight, but I knew we were going to talk about him a lot, and we were going to talk about him in the news and notes section as well.
It won't be every week. It'll, you'll pick and choose.
They got to be faced in lefties.
Yeah, that's it doesn't even have to be the whole week, though. That's the beauty of, like, if you're willing to put in the work. You say this all the time. Grichuk is great. Like, if he's facing 3 out of 4 lefties in the first half of the week, great. FAAB him for the first half of the week. Bench him for the weekend, and then just be happy with the results. Another 1-year deal that comes at a major league level. Yoan Moncada signs a 1-year deal with the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. What role is he like? This is what the Angels do. Is it just like find whatever pieces they can find and then just like splatter up against the infield and see what ends up sticking? Where is Moncada sticking with the Angels? Is he sticking?
Probably at third base after about 3 innings. Rendon, right? Seriously, I think he is the third baseman by the end of April. The way things have gone with Rendon over the past several seasons, and I'm not so sure it's not worth a dart. In fact, it is worth a dart. It's just a matter of when we want to throw that dart.
Yeah, sure.
Because a change of scenery here could really be what we've needed to see for Moncada. And then with the injuries as well, we've only seen 600 plate appearances twice, and the most recent time was 2021. So maybe there's still something there. He's still not 30 years old. That surprised me.
That's
I knew he wasn't close to 40, but I was surprised that Yohan Moncada is not 30 years old yet. He's been around for 15, 16 years, it seems like. It's actually 2016 since we've seen him at the major league level. But as a Red Sox fan, as a prospect, we've been talking about this guy for 20
for
years.
20 years, yeah. Exactly. Remember, I mean, young Moncada, part of the Chris Sale trade,
Right?
along with Kopech, and that was a big deal at the time, and everything turned out the way it's supposed to, I guess. Another, I don't know, reclamation project, if you will. Ramon Laureano signs a deal with Baltimore. I mean, I asked the same question when they've signed other outfielders. What is Baltimore doing here? And how many mouths do they feel like they need to have to feed on this roster? Is there enough to go around for Laureano?
I think he will get some. And for that reason, I think this is one of those instances where the team keeps telling us something we don't want to hear. So we're not listening. And I am no longer interested at all in redraft leagues in Heston Kierstad. I think it's that simple.
Yeah. So it's like these kind of signings don't always, it doesn't really affect Laureano, but it affects all the other interesting players that you might have been looking at prior. Another one, kind of, I don't know, it wasn't really a head scratcher, but like Tommy Pham signed a 1-year deal with the Pittsburgh Pirates. You need to remind me. Did they re-sign Kutch? Is McCutcheon coming? He came back. Okay, so that's the part that's like didn't really fit for me. Is like, all right, is Pham and Kutch there? Like, I feel like they were kind of filling the same spot for the Pirates. That veteran presence, obviously McCutch having so much more history with the Pirates, winning his MVP there so many years ago. But what kind of role are we seeing with Pham, or are we in for another 3-team season for Tommy Pham by the end of it?
Well, unless the Pirates make a run, I think we're in at least for a 2-team season.
Sure.
That's probably their plan. Like, this is a guy, if things aren't going well for us, we can get something for him. But roster resource has him leading off and playing right field.
I mean, that's what happened with your Kansas City Royals last year.
Right, exactly. And he won't play every single day, but if he's going to lead off, this is somebody I'm definitely going to be interested in, if not late in drafts, definitely early in the season in FAAB, depending on Pittsburgh's matchups and if I need an outfielder, because we talk about this in season, we talk about it in the off season. You say it all the time. Tommy Pham's going to do what Tommy Pham does. We know exactly what he's going to do. He's going to go out there and he's going to be on pace for mid-teens home runs if it was a full season, right? That 70-70 is about what he'll be on pace for. So when he's in the lineup, especially leading off with that 250-ish batting average, he can be very useful. He's just not somebody any of us are excited about pushing 40 years old drafting. But once the season starts, the age of the players don't matter. We use age and aging curves when we're projecting, but once the season gets going and we're only looking at results, I don't care how old they are.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like ignoring ADP. Just ignore their birth certificate by the time the season actually gets going. You just look at the numbers that they're putting up. All right, another 1-year outfielder. He's leaving the New York Mets and now signing a 1-year deal with the Minnesota Twins. Is Harrison Bader. Harrison Bader hasn't been, the poster boy for health himself. And I think it's appropriate that he joins the Minnesotans that have had their, more than their fair share of injury related hitters, especially hitters. Where do you see Bader kind of fitting in here with the likes of, Buxton and everybody else that's, in that outfield?
Yeah, this is this is even more I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, frustrating, I guess, than it already was in Minnesota. Uh, I we've brought it up several times over the past couple of seasons. Minnesota is becoming the team that plays matchups more than any other. I don't have official numbers on that, but if I had to guess at who plays matchups more than any other team, I would say it is the Minnesota Twins these days. So we have Harrison Bader projected short side platoon, which is something we might expect. But when we look at his performance in 2024, I know it takes a lot more plate appearances here, but we saw him a lot more versus righties, and he performed better versus righties. On a per plate appearance basis, he might have performed better in the power categories, um, versus lefties, but he was much better versus righties in 2024. I want to go back really quick, but that was an outlier. There in previous seasons and his career, it has typically been the other way around. So I think Jason's got it right here. Minnesota's going to throw him on a short side platoon, and they're a team that plays the matchups pretty strictly. So that's going to make it really hard to use Harrison Bader, other than at times like with Randall Grichuk, we know on the schedule there's a lot of lefties coming up.
Yeah, I mean, the question is if when he is in the lineup, does he bat close to the top of the order, like he had some history doing as well, or is he just thrown in there at the bottom of the lineup as well? Like those short side, the platoon partners are right in the middle of the hard lineup. If you're going by
Right.
where Jason has either Larnach or Wallner at the 3-5 spot, I don't see Bader fitting in the 3 or the 5 spot. So Bader's like either a top or the bottom of the order type of bat in this lineup, in my opinion.
I could see him being at the top, and Castro and Correa, or maybe just Correa moving down a slot. I could see him going up there. Unfortunately, it seems like more often we just see him slotted at the bottom.
There you go. Yeah, or as a pinch runner, which we know we
Right.
can have some value
Well, like
in
that.
All right, couple more. We got some pitchers that signed as well as a trade again with a pitcher as well. So I'll get to all the pitchers right after this quick break. All right, I mentioned it at the top of the show, Kevin. Jack Flaherty did sign a 2-year deal of his own, returning to the Detroit Tigers, who traded him away at the deadline to the Dodgers while still making the playoffs themselves. So good on them getting their guy back, and seeing if he can continue to rekindle that career of his back in Detroit. I don't know if this goes hand in hand, but I mean, I'll just jump into the trade that happened as well. The Detroit sends Alex Fado down to Tampa Bay for a minor league catcher, Anderson Delgado, and some money to the Tigers. So I'm assuming that the addition of Flaherty gave the Tigers the extra boost to pass off Faedo to somewhere else. So obviously there wasn't going to be any more opportunity there. But what does this rotation look like to you for the Tigers with Flaherty, definitely in there in the top 3 of that rotation?
Yeah, and nice ballpark, place he's familiar with. So it's a good landing spot for Jack Flaherty. I have never really been a big Jack Flaherty guy. I know he's had his moments, and especially the first half of 2024, that was a big L for me. Says somebody that I have avoided uh, for most of his career, and I felt pretty justified in that until 2024. uh, you know, 2019. What was so amazing about his 2019 was that was the year the ball was flying, and he had an absolutely amazing season as a starter, right? With a 2.75 ERA and 11 wins in St. Louis. We haven't seen anything like that since. That's 6 years ago now. 2024 for the first half. He was pretty lights out, but he did slow down in the second half. That was in Detroit. So I know some people would throw that back at me. I just am not a fan of what I think Jack Flaherty can do for my fantasy teams. I've been wrong, but I've been right more than I've been wrong. And I think I'm going to continue here. Um, although there couldn't be much better of a landing spot as far
Right.
as ballpark and familiarity. The only issue would be what's their bullpen like and what's the offensive lineup, the supporting cast. But as far as ballpark and familiarity with the team, it's a great spot for him to be back to. I guess if you have supported Jack Flaherty in the past, this is a great spot for him.
Right.
If you're like me and haven't, it doesn't really change my opinion.
Yeah, it doesn't actually push you back in a different direction. I will say, I mean, winning ball club made the playoffs. You can't imagine that they're going to take a step backwards going this year, going into 2025. So, the wins could definitely be there for him if the bullpen can hold tight and not fall apart throughout the course of the season, or at least during his starts. So opportunity to chase some wins there. Flaherty will be given the opportunity to go as deep as his arm will allow him to. It's not like he's the type of pitcher that they're going to sign to a 2-year deal and then just baby him throughout the course of the season. We saw, even after the trade to the Dodgers, we all know what the Dodgers do to pitchers. And they did not treat him that way as well. Granted, expiring contract and all that, but all right, well, let's move to the bullpen now. We have Carlos Esteva. Actually, you know what? No, Kevin, I mentioned Alex Faedo going to Tampa Bay. Does he have a role with the Rays with this trade?
I'm not sure. Tampa, because they have so many guys coming back from injury, right?
Sure.
And we Shane McClanahan, Bradley, even some guys we were seeing last year, Shane Baz, Drew Rasmussen, all these guys coming back. So I think he'll be a long reliever. It's Tampa, maybe an opener, maybe a follower. I don't think he's in the starting rotation, and I don't think we see him in high leverage relief innings. I shouldn't phrase it that way, because if you're being used as an opener or a follower, I would consider that fairly high leverage starting out a game. But I think that's the route we're looking at, and that probably does not make him very appealing for our fantasy teams.
Something just I find very interesting. It's just looking at the roster page for Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has made a name for themselves from, you never know who's going to be pitching out of the bullpen throughout, never mind a game, but throughout the course of the year, because they will send pitchers down, bring a new one up, and just do that all year round. And Mason Montgomery is the only one projected to be in the bullpen that has any options. And so literally their entire, and don't get me wrong, their bullpen has some names that we have talked about and will continue to talk about throughout the show. Besides Pete Fairbanks coming back, we talked about Edwin Uceta a lot, Garrett Cleavinger, Manuel Rodriguez, all names that can throw a really hard, can get you a lot of strikeouts, and can be pretty solid in the ratios as well. But Fido, along with all those guys, have no options. They're not going anywhere unless they're going to get DFA'd or traded themselves. So it's just interesting to see that difference in what, at least the narrative that I have read and seen out of Tampa Bay's bullpen over the last couple years. They might have a pretty set bullpen for the majority of the season that you can almost rely on, almost.
Yeah, and they have about 25 pitchers, it looks like, are non-roster invitees to spring training as well. And that does not include the guy I'm watching at the back end of the Tampa rotation. Still very curious to see if they can do anything with Joe Boyle.
Yes, that's not even counting him. He's not even
Right.
listed here. Yeah, that's a great call out there. All right, another pitcher in a bullpen now. Your Kansas City Royals add a closer? Question mark. Carlos Estevez looking like he might take over the job for Urseg, or at least he's saying all the right things. At least from what I read, he's like, you know what, I'm just here to pitch. If I get some closing opportunities, great. And then the team's saying that he will definitely get his share, or he'll be given the opportunities. But they were not naming anybody to be the closer. Is this just equally bad for both Urseg and Estevez, as if you had drafted them, or are you thinking that your Royals are going to end up going in one direction or the other?
I think if you drafted either one of them, which I have, each of them, as your RP2, some people may have Urseg as an RP1 in some early drafts. That could hurt substantially. I think it hurts them equally. As you said, he's saying the right things. Everybody is saying the right things. Luka Urseg was contacted by the Royals before they made the signing, which I think is cool. And he said all the right things. Whatever you want me to do to help us win, that's what I want to do, right? And so they did check with him, or at least notify him before the signing, which means Estevez is getting some saves for certain,
Sure.
right? Otherwise, why would Urseg care? Why would they
Yeah.
contact him? I think Urseg is the high leverage guy. Now, if we consider that high leverage isn't going to start until the sixth inning, hopefully, with starters going, 5 or into the sixth, or if we're talking seventh, eighth, ninth with Harvey, Urseg, and Estevez, that means Urseg is still going to get about a third of the save opportunities if they're going by where the lineup is at, right? If they want him to face the toughest part of the lineup the last time through, a third of the time, that's the ninth inning. So, and then however everything else works out, I think both of these guys are going to end up with 15 to 20 saves. If one guy takes off and runs with it, it would be Urseg, I think. I know Estevez is capable as a closer, but when you have the Royals just went from a bullpen in less than a season because they didn't have these guys until the trade deadline last year. But Estevez is new. Urseg is new. Hunter Harvey only had a couple of appearances before he was injured. They're counting on him a lot. They did have John Schreiber the whole season and Angel Zerpa. But those were their two best relievers until the trade deadline
Right.
when they made these additions. Now, them being depth pieces in the bullpen is all of a sudden a strength for Kansas City. I don't think they're going to allow anybody to struggle in the late innings. So I don't think Estevez can take it and run with it. I think they would continue to let Urseg pitch the ninth if that's when the most potent part of the opponent's lineup's coming up. So 15 to 20 for each of those two is where I'm at.
And let's not forget the likes of like James MacArthur, who everybody was drafting at the beginning of last year, thinking he was the closer for the Royals all season long, projected to be starting in AAA. Does he start in AAA? Does that make sense to you as a Royals fan? Do you think he just gets bumped down in the bullpen?
It doesn't. I think there's a couple more moves coming here, because it's getting crowded. It really is getting crowded. They still have Carlos Hernandez as well, and he's been rumored in a lot of trade talks. I think something else is going to happen. I don't see James MacArthur. Carlos Hernandez still might not have as much to say about it, but I don't see these guys sticking around AAA if they have any outs at all, for that. And yeah, like even Chris Stratton, right? Chris Stratton was not very good for Kansas City last year, but they needed him at the top of the bullpen. Now he's at the bottom. He's going to be a great depth piece, I think. When you go from Chris Stratton was probably their number 2 coming out of spring training last year in the bullpen, and now he's the last guy other than the long reliever, who was Sam Long, who was their best reliever in the first half. I'm pretty excited about this bullpen, if you can't tell now, but it is going to make it more. There almost has to be a move because they can't keep all these guys happy, and some of them won't have the options even to leave them down in the minors. I'm actually looking really quick. Yeah, Carlos Hernandez is out of options, but he's not listed on roster resource. So that guy's got to be moved or he's not sticking around. MacArthur's only got one option left and he's not going to be happy about taking it. So, yeah, it's
let's not forget that half of your rotation is made up of relievers or right. Former relievers. Obviously, Lugo kind of passing that on, but between Michael Lorenzen, Chris Bubik, Alec Marsh, all have had time in the bullpen in their careers as well. So,
and a lot of people think that's the best route for Daniel Lynch now as well. There's not room for him in the bullpen or the rotation right now, and he was amazing last season. So, yeah, it's good problems to have, but there's going to be some moves coming. I don't think all these guys are on the roster opening day.
We'll keep an eye on Kansas
We still
City
need a corner outfielder. So
there, could have brought Tommy Pham back.
I'd have been happy with that.
That he didn't come back?
No, I'd have been happy if he was back.
Oh, yeah. You would be happy.
I would have taken that. Yeah.
Last piece of news here. Another reliever DFA'd by the Dodgers. Ryan Brazier was traded to the Chicago Cubs. My question is, Brazier was pretty good last year. Put up some really good numbers. Can he? We didn't talk about it last week because it just happened so long ago. But Ryan Presley signing with the Cubs as well, presumed closer. Can Brazier, chip away at that as they move the likes of like Porter Hodge down into higher leverage situations? Or, what's your take on this bullpen, and is there a target for you moving forward?
I think he's a great spec here because you can literally do it with your last pick.
Sure.
Because people that don't think it's Presley do think it's Hodge. And I don't think a lot of people realize just how good Brazier was for much of last season with the Dodgers, the past couple of seasons, actually. So, when he's projected for a better ERA. I know I'm talking ERA, but I'm talking projected, not what happened. He's projected for a bit better ERA than either Presley or Hodge. So right away, I start wondering, well, in the numbers the Cubs look at, when you start looking at whatever their stuff plus model they have internally is, they take that into account a lot when it comes to relievers. At least that's the impression I get listening to Eno Saris talk about it. And he knows he's in those locker rooms. So we could be surprised about how late in games we start seeing Brazier fairly early in the season. I think he's a great spec play.
Yeah, I just go look at his numbers. He was very good for his time with the Dodgers. And I mean, the bullpen in Chicago for the Cubs, that is, has been a point of contention. Just ask Sarah Sanchez when it comes to Cubs fans and their bullpens with Jed Hoyer. This was a pretty good move. I don't love the trade for Presley, but Presley has the presence. He has the veteran presence at the back of games. He has the experience. But I like the Brazier move because he's just a good reliever who can, get strikes and get outs and get you through the late inning games. And he's shown that. All right. Well, that's enough news for today. We're going to get into talking about opportunity. We're talking about hitters that might have opportunity to help your batting average and some volume here or there throughout the season, especially in a streaming environment. We're going to get to that right after this break. All right, Kevin, let's quickly go through just high level opinions of because we're talking about one technically one category here. Just batting average in a standard 5x5 league. Of course, there's OBP, there's other leagues that play, but we're just considering the fact that we're looking at batting average in a standard 5x5 where you're worried about runs, stolen bases as speed. We talked about home runs and RBIs in the power, but here it's just batting average. I'm lumping in plate appearances because even at bats is probably even more of an important stat when you're talking about batting average, because it plays a bigger role in how powerful the batting average can actually be for your teams. The more batting, the more at bats you get, the more your batting average impacts your final tally at the end of the season. Plate appearances, not so much, because a lot of those plate appearances could end up being walks, or just they don't count as at bats. They don't count toward batting average. But first, like, what is your target? You talk about this a lot. You want to target for like that top 3 or that third or fourth ranking to get across the board. What are you targeting in batting average, and how closely are you trying to get your players, each draft pick, to be near that versus trying to get a pillow for somebody else that you can get a little bit lower? Maybe you have to find that power guy, like that Schwarber type of guy that can get you the 40 home runs, but you're going to take a hit. How steady have you been in your drafts and continuing to be throughout the rest of the draft season?
So far, so good for 2025. So far, I think I'm doing better at drafting batting average or projected batting average. I think a couple of things based on what you said. One, I think you can never have enough of a pillow, even if you're not planning on taking a Kyle Schwarber. Right? That just means you need more of a pillow. Sure. Right? Because think of it this way. My target, you brought that up, is I say just shy of 260 because I'm not saying 258, 259, but that's our 80th percentile target. It's about 258 in a 15-team league. That's where we are. So I say just shy of 260. And I'm afraid that can get me in trouble because I know it has in the past. Because we know the league-wide average batting average these days is in the low 240s. So when we're talking about that and we're looking at stat lines or a line of projections, 240 doesn't look so bad. And oftentimes, I know I fall into this. Somebody hits 240, that batting average isn't going to hurt me much. But the other thing, because we've made this shift, I think many of us over the past few years, we don't talk about at-bats anymore. We talk about plate appearances because we're including the walks. We're including on-base percentage, slugging percentage instead of batting average, right? But when we're talking fantasy baseball, plate appearances mean zero. They don't mean a thing to us.
I mean, they just mean opportunity.
At-bats do.
Yeah.
At-bats do, right? I think for talking in terms of fantasy baseball, I'm going to get back in the mindset of looking at bats more than plate appearances, because if I'm looking at plate appearances, I could miss something. If this guy walks 120 times in a season, those 600 plate appearances aren't very good. So I'm looking more at bats, and 2, that mindset that a 240, 245 batting average doesn't hurt me. It very well could hurt me if I know. So I'm making this transition from plate appearances to at bats, right? And we need I think it was the guilds. Somebody, I apologize if I'm crediting the wrong person because it's been several weeks ago posted. You really need 7,800 plate appearances in a 12-team NFBC league over the season, right? And I started thinking, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. How many at bats? So even if I just round down a little bit in the walk, and this is easy because we have 14 offensive positions. That's why I landed on 7,000 at bats, right? And I'm going to dive in a little more. That might not be enough. I might need to plan on more. But using that as an example, if I have a 258 fantasy team batting average in 7,000 at-bats, right? And one player with 500 at-bats hits 244, my team batting average has dropped a full point. It's dropped from 258 to 257. I just said 244 won't hurt me. I said 240 won't hurt me. 244 drops my batting average a whole point if it's somebody getting 500 at-bats. So we start talking to these guys 220, 230. Kyle Schwarber, for example, we're worried he could even be sub 200, but we need to get that 220, 230 to make the three categories he's elite in worth it. I mean, that is a big chunk, right? For every 14 points, if we're assuming every one of my lineup spots is getting 500 at bats for this example, every 14 points under 258 he hits, my entire team's batting average drops a point. When you start thinking of it that way, 245 batting average hurts, right? It hurts. And so we get into this, or I have in the past, of drafting a whole bunch of 240, 250 guys, especially when you start letting them add up, you're moving your baseline average to that point. And so, yes, to get back to your original question, whatever pillow you think you have, you still need more. And then really, really try not to say that 245 batting average won't hurt me too often. Right, a guy like Kyle Schwarber hits 220. If you're prepared for it, the three categories he's a lead in are going to be worth it. But you can't say that too often, or the next thing you know, your whole team's hitting under 250.
Yeah, I mean that ends up being the question, right? Is it when does it become worth it?
That's why you
And
should track it. That's why I'm a proponent of. I don't necessarily have a target for runs and RBI during a draft. I kind of feel like I can, by feel, know how I'm doing in those counting stats. But I do track my batting average throughout the draft because it's easy to lose track that, oh, I kept saying since I have Mookie Betts, I can draft this guy and this guy and this
right.
guy. Well, he covered one or two of them, not 8 of them.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just like a platoon player. It's like you can only platoon with one other guy. It's like you got to balance it out in that manner. There aren't very many players that can cover 2 drops of that nature as well. So there are only so many Luis Arises out there that can balance out a Kyle Schwarber. It used to be the Joey Gallo pillow. Now it's the Schwarber pillow.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was the idea of streaming this category. We talk about streaming any category all season long. My biggest thing, like a couple years ago, and I'll still say, is like you can stream stolen bases almost easier than you can steal home runs, right? How, because of the sample size, batting average isn't it is a year long. When we say somebody's going to hit 250, we think they're going to hit 250 throughout the entire season, right? It doesn't mean they're going to hit 250 every single week throughout the season. They might have stretches of 270, 275, and then other stretches of 212, 220, 225 at most, and that's going to average out to that 250. And so what strategies do you have to stream batting averages, or is it more of an opportunity like we talk about throughout the season? This guy just has more opportunity this week. I'm going to throw him out there, cross my fingers, and hope that whatever he does is positive, in knowing that if he does negative things to my batting average, it's only for a couple games. It's only for a week. It's a small sample size. It's not going to hurt me that much. What's your take on this area?
Yeah, I think it comes down more to when I'm streaming, I'm trying not to destroy my batting average rather than I'm trying to help it or even protect it. And we talk about it this way many times throughout the season of trying to at least protect our batting average. Because when we're talking about guys available on the waiver wire, if their batting average is going to help us, which means it's above 260. They don't do anything else, or they wouldn't be on the waiver wire. So it gets to the point where, all right, what do I need? Whether it be runs, whether it be home runs, whether it be those stolen bases, then I'm looking for guys that have the least hurtful batting average when I'm streaming, more than it's a batting average that will help me. Usually, once in a while, and that's when we get excited on our FAAB shows throughout the season, is if there's somebody available that actually can hit for a high batting average and has great matchups for the week. So we think there might be some more stolen base opportunities, or maybe they're in line for a home run or two. We get really excited if there's a guy like that and he's a 270 hitter. But you're exactly right. Batting average is so volatile. 300 hitters go over 25 sometimes.
Sure.
So if you're trying to stream a batting average, it's probably a losing proposition in my mind. But I do try to not intentionally hurt my batting average at the other end.
Now, I mean, the other side of it is that you can do the Randall Grichuk situation,
Yep.
where it's like, if you just know this guy does hits, on average or above more than average, hits better against a certain type
Didn't he
of
hit
pitcher.
300 he hit like 311 last year or something, I think, versus lefty.
The problem is that
crazy.
he just, obviously there are less lefties out there, so he doesn't always get the volume. It's just what he does when it happens is all but guaranteed. And he's not the only one. So it's like there are guys that are consistent against one-handedness or a style of pitcher, or sometimes it's just like in a certain ballpark or a certain team. And that's a lot, there's a lot less to hold your hat on when it comes to like the science of that. Sometimes it's just gut feeling. You're like crossing your fingers and hope it all works out for the best. But playing matchups, like how much are you, how much do you weigh that when it comes to like, listen, I got to roll the dice here. It's August. I gotta hopefully I hit gold on this one. This seems like it has the best kind of matchups. I'll throw a couple more dollars on this guy and put him in my lineup for the week and hope for the best.
Yeah, there are 86 hitters projected to hit 258 or higher, according to the BAT-X. So according to the BAT-X, there are less than 6 players per team in a 15-team league, less than half of our lineup, that won't hurt our batting average. So I keep going back to when I'm streaming and we're start talking late picks or FAAB plays. When I'm talking about helping my batting average, I mean not hurting my batting average. And I would say this, late season, when we know more about where we stand in the other categories as well, we see this often with catcher. Right? People will intentionally put an injured catcher in their lineup because every other catcher is actively going to hurt their batting average, but they're good enough in their counting stats that, and what's available as a second catcher on the wire at that time of year probably isn't going to help you in the other categories much either. So not taking the hit in batting average is a win over taking zeros in the other categories.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just, sometimes you can do more harm than good just by having somebody in a spot, and you're happier with the zeros. The volume you're going to get out of that position, specifically catcher, isn't worth it. That extra run, maybe that extra RBI, maybe you get lucky, he pops a home run. Is that worth the 1 for 25 streak? That one hit that they get might be a home run, but that 1 for 25 is going to do more harm than that one home run probably will. And most
it
of the
would
time,
be
that one
very
hit is not a home
difficult to
run.
say early in the year, but late in the year, you might be willing to make that sacrifice.
I mean, you have more to work with there, right? You have more data to know where you stand and, how much you have to lose at that point. Yeah, I mean, this is a tough category to really wrap your head around, especially when you're drafting. Like, as the season goes on, you almost feel like you're behind the 8 ball at all times because there are so many at-bats behind you that the ratios in general, all 3 ratios in a standard 5x5, can feel very daunting to move around. But as a reminder, we say this all the time, the ratios are those three categories where your opponents can actually come down to you as well. They can work both ways. You're not only trying to go up, you're also crossing your fingers that they end up coming down to you as well.
And that's something to keep in mind when you're making your own FAAB moves, setting your own lineups. If your opponents have injury concerns, multiple guys in their starting lineup injured, it is highly likely their ratios are taking a hit.
Sure. It's easier for, yeah, absolutely. They have less pillows to work with there.
Exactly.
All right, we're gonna do what we normally do here, Kevin, and look at ways in which you can round out your drafts at the end, post 300 ADP style, focusing on batting average and at bats. I have already adjusted my spreadsheet to account for at bats instead of plate appearances.
Nice.
So thank you for doing that for me, hitting that one home. And we're going to get to all those. We're going to pick some catchers. We're going to look for some catching options for corner infield, middle infield, and outfielder options that can help your batting average, or at least considerations at the end of your drafts. We'll do that right after this break. All right, Kevin. The objective here was pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We do this with all the other hitting categories as well. We're going to look at hitters that have gone post 300 in. I went by what you said, the last 2 weeks worth of online championships that have concluded. And most of those have, because they're not most of those. I don't think any of them are slow drafts. I think they're all one and dones. So there were 11 drafts in the last 2 weeks. These are online championships on the NFBC platform. So we're talking 12 team leagues. So past 300, going to be one of your last picks, if not your last pick in your drafts. If you're looking at a shot in the dark, at a dart, at a pillow, to help your batting average, to put somebody on your bench that you can then throw in there. Actually, Kevin, this leads me to a question. Like, are you going into drafts? And I know this changes throughout the year. Your bench, what's your makeup of your bench? How many pitch? Like, when you start the season, are you splitting it 4 and 3, either with 4 pitchers, 3 hitters, or 4 hitters and 3 pitchers? Or are you going hitter heavy or pitcher heavy normally?
Earlier in draft season, until about right now, I just started looking at team schedules the first couple of weeks of the season over the past couple of days, because leading up to about this point, my bench is mostly pitching. There will be pitchers get hurt during spring training, right?
Oh,
So I'm shoring those guys up, and and some pitching that doesn't get drafted that first FAAB week will go for big money. In my mind, hitters, the closer we get to the season, and then in season, I'm always going to have my coverage so I can replace someone on Friday if I need to. And you know, we've talked recently some multi-eligible guys that can really help us out. And I'm also starting to look ahead at the schedule for the first weekend and first couple of full weeks. Granted, we don't have a very good idea of the handedness of pitching teams will be facing yet. I'm not really taking that into account yet. Later we get into draft season, I will more and more. That means I need a couple more hitters on my bench as we get closer to the season. So right now it's probably 6-1 pitchers to hitters. It has been 5-2, but I can really see it evening out. And then once I'm in season, I have more hitters on my bench than pitchers.
I mean, that the logic makes complete sense. I think your first point was the one that hit home the hardest for me. Was pitchers will go for big money in weeks 1 and 2, and then probably weeks 3 and 4 as well throughout the beginning of the season, where hitters just won't. I mean, unless they're a huge name or like a big prospect that came up early, like there, you can usually find decent waterfall options at different positions early on in the season. So you can save a lot of money that way. If you use all your draft capital instead of your FAAB dollars on those pitchers, you'll have those options injuries happen, like you said, during spring training. Some guys just don't come back the way you thought they would, or by the beginning of the season. So having our options to stream the matchups from the pitching side makes a whole lot of sense, and I'll be doing that as my drafts get rolling here as well. Cool. So let's go position by position. We will start with catcher. I've only so I made a list based on PLV projections, as you mentioned at the top of the show. Version 3 is out, so if you have PL Pro, you'll have access to those. And there are some interesting comparisons, especially when I compare some PLV projections to some of the publicly facing projections over on Fangraphs. The only my list is made up of only players who are going past ADP of 300. That was a rule. Obviously our hitters, and they have to be projected for at least 400 at bats, because as we know, like, that average doesn't matter if you're not putting enough volume into the pile to actually make a difference. So of course, only one catcher actually made the list. Shocker, right? With all those filters, not to mention just the 400 at bats. To be honest, Patrick Bailey in San Francisco projected from PLV 411 at bats, only 457 plate appearances. Not a guy who's projected to walk a whole bunch or hit sac flies, sac bunts, whatever. And ADP of 345, average it out. It's got a min pick of 304 in these 11 drafts that have completed. Starting catcher should get those at bats for San Francisco. Can you see Patrick Bailey being a C2 on any of your teams? Because I know you have a very strict rule. Well, I want to say if it's a rule, but you have a direction you're going, obviously, with these catchers, that you need the at bats. And if you're not going to get the quote, maybe the 500 at bats, they're not really an option. And you've been jumping a lot of catchers early on in your drafts. If that falters or somebody else is jumping them even more than that, Patrick Bailey, could that be a target of yours very, very late?
Yes, he is one of the guys that if I don't get to the first 10 or so that I want, he is an option for me when that doesn't work out. He's projected by most projections to hit in the, around 230, 235, it looks like. We've seen better than that in the minors, and we have seen him a very consistent, 800 plate appearances, 234 batting average at the major league level. So I feel like his projected batting average is almost a floor for him, because we've seen him in streaks perform much better than that. And both of the last two seasons, even 2023, when we only saw about 350 plate appearances, it really seemed like he wore down later in the season. I think this being his third, what I would call full season at the major league level, and we know how great he is in defense, and the Fangraphs playing time projection. So the one that we see in the Fangraphs depth charts, the Zips and the Oopsie projections here, all on Fangraphs, they have him at over 500 plate appearances, which was kind of my cutoff for that top 10 or 11 catchers. Mm-hmm. That was all based on plate appearances. So you brought it up. He doesn't walk, so he has a lot of at-bats. He's projected for 455 at-bats. That's close to as many at-bats as some of the guys getting close to 600 plate appearances will have.
Right.
Exactly. So hopefully, because of that, because more at-bats are counting, then we're really hoping that he spikes this batting average a little bit. Sure. But I really think he can. Like I said, I think these 230-ish projections are really a floor for him, and we could see some improvement in his third full season.
Yeah, the other name that almost made the cut, that obviously I think he takes a little bit of a hit now, but we talked about him a couple of times, is Luis Campusano of San Diego. But now with the addition of Elias Diaz over there for the Padres, Campusano is probably not looking like he's going to get the bulk of the playing time behind the plate or at the very least, it's going to be closer to a 50-50 split, and it's not going to be closer to that 500 at bats that I was hoping to see him get. So what option are you looking at catcher? If you're desperate for this category.
I'm going back to a guy that many of us were pretty excited about 2 and 3 years ago, and that is Alejandro Kirk. He is the earliest catcher being drafted that qualifies by the rules for this. But he he was a batting average guy, right? When he broke out in 2022 with his 14 home runs, he did that while hitting 285. Right. And that's why we were so excited coming into 2023. He was banged up. We saw Danny Jansen in the lineup a little more than maybe we thought. We get a little over 400 plate appearances, and he hit 250. 2024, more of the same. Slightly less plate appearances, hit around 250. Projected for more of a 260-ish batting average, and now Danny Jansen's gone. So I fully expect a minimum of the 400-ish plate appearances, maybe approaching the 500. The projections have him for like 415 to 425-ish in there. I could see more than that. That's about 110 games. I could see him getting 120, 130 games behind the plate, especially if he does bounce back a little bit. And then we actually saw some power in 2022. That wasn't a great year for the ball flying. In fact, it was a pretty dead year. So that's another reason we were a little more excited about his power too. And he's still a young guy, still 26 years old. And some of these guys, I mean, he's 26 years old and running a major league pitching staff. He might not have considered his hitting for a while. So this is a guy that I think when I say his batting average won't hurt you, you're probably safe saying that. And then you might actually be getting some batting average help from a catcher going after pick 300.
Yeah, PLV projections have him for quite a few less at bats. I'm not sure if we're taking into consideration the fact that Jansen's not there anymore. Kyle's got him at 375 total at bats, 425 plate appearances, so decent amount of walks in comparison. But at a 273 average, so a little bit higher of a couple points higher of a projected average overall with less at bats. You get the at bats closer to what the other projections are projecting them at, while keeping the PLV projection for the average. We're in good shape here.
So.
Let's move around the diamond. Corner infield, Kevin. I'll let you start this one off. First base, third base. Not always a position that we think of for batting average help. Obviously, the narrative over the decades has always been just we're looking for power here, but there's got to be an option here. Obviously, Luis Arias always comes to mind at first base, but he's not going to be available here. Who are you looking at post 300?
Yeah, we talked about this guy briefly, and I think I brought this up last week, Adam, on our PitchCon episode, but I can't remember for sure. If you have not seen the Bat X's projection for Andrew Vaughn yet, and you like the Bat X, you're probably moving Andrew Vaughn up your first base rankings. I think he comes out as the 11th overall first baseman in 5x5. And much of that is going to have to do with his projected batting average. And it's just, Andrew Vaughn, we have talked about him a little bit this offseason. If I hadn't brought that up last week, it seems like he's way too young to be old and boring, but maybe that's what being in the middle of the White Sox lineup will do for you. But we got Andrew Vaughn here hitting cleanup, right? With a couple of guys that do actually get on base. I think the White Sox are going to have the worst record in baseball again, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as bad as it was last season. But he's projected, well over 500 at-bats, about 550-ish at-bats with Yes, that batting average that won't necessarily hurt you. Mid 250s. We're almost to my target. So he's not hurting me. And if he can go over this a little bit, remember these are 50th percentile projections. This is a guy we have seen hit 270 at the major league level. So if he can do that, which is a possibility, because his strikeout rates, his walk rates, everything has remained good. His BABIP was down last season, so that alone can bring the average back up, which is being projected. He did drop to 246 batting average. But I think Andrew Vaughn in this spot, yes, it's the White Sox, but he's going to be hitting cleanup every day with a decent to good batting average and that 20-70-70 I'm looking for.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about him or you brought him up on the show. You kind of threw Todd off his game a little bit, just because he's like Todd, like
it was last week. Then
he kicked Andrew Vaughn out of my Ask game and threw in someone else, and then you were like, I might be keeping Andrew Vaughn. You'd be like, I think I should be looking at his projections a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, this goes to show exactly what we started off the show talking about. There's sometimes too much information. You got to know, you got to pick and choose sometimes which ones you want to focus on the most. BATX historically been an amazing, especially for hitters, been a great,
especially for hitters. System. But don't write the BATX projection down in ink and forget about the others. All of the others are fairly in agreement. 250, low 20s home runs, not that 26, right? Mid 60s runs scored. Still not bad for a guy we can get off the waiver wire in many leagues. But don't write the BATX down in pen and ignore the others.
Sure. PLV projections, for what it's worth, has them at a 255 batting average, with 546 at bats. Of course, Andrew Vaughn also, with that many at bats comes quite a few opportunities for walks. So 622 plate appearances for 614 plate appearances for Andrew Vaughn versus his 556 at bats. All right, so I'm going to go to the top of my list here, a little bit further down in ADP, 358 or 359. With the PLV projected batting average of 277 through 406 at bats. So not as many at bats, but that's because he's projected to be in a little bit of a platoon. Historically, Ryan O'Hearn has been a platoon type of player. But for the Baltimore Orioles, being at least roster resource has them in that platoon at the DH spot. DH is a hard thing to platoon just because anybody can get thrown into that position. But the beauty is that if he's projected to be a DH, he's still eligible at both first and outfield in NFBC formats. And of course, if you're eligible in those in NFBC, you're going to be eligible for those in pretty much everywhere else as well. But historically, obviously last year, fine. 260, 264 average against lefties and righties. Still did not get a whole lot of opportunities. So this will be somebody that obviously lives on your bench and you'd be playing those matchups in those cases. But historically still batting very well against righties. Like I said, 264 last year. Looking over his career numbers, still right around that 252 range. Where you're not quite in that scary moment where you're like, oh, I think that's fine. That's close enough to what I'm looking at. But if you can get into the Randall Grichuk type of situations where, you're seeing him face off against multiple righties in a row, he's going to get the volume. Obviously he can still bring some pop as well to the rest of the categories that you're looking at. So depending on what Baltimore ends up doing as far as how many mouths they actually decide they want to feed, Ryan O'Hearn could still end up being a nice little bench piece for your last pick if that's the direction you're trying to go for. Noel Schanuel is also an option.
I think we're being my fault, but I think we're all being too leery of what we think may happen in Baltimore, and we're not just paying attention to what they have done and what they are doing. Right? We keep thinking because of all these young players, Ryan O'Hearn's got to be on the way out. Yep. Well, a team that we've realized was told they could spend money but chose not to did give Ryan O'Hearn $8 million for this coming season.
Fair. Fair. Tyler O'Neill fits that bill as well. And somehow Jorge Mateo is slated to play a big role for the Orioles. Or, I'm paraphrasing the words around that too. So, we'll see what they end up doing here. All right, we'll move into the middle infield here. I was trying to say before, Nolan Schanuel of the Angels, also an option. Over 500 at bats here by PLV projections with a 263 batting average at first base. All right, middle infield, Kevin, the one right at the top of my list, the highest projected batting average by PLV of players going with an ADP of 300 or later, being projected exactly 400 at bats. And I don't know that I buy it. I think that this is going to be a lot higher. Is Hyseung Kim of the Los Angeles Dodgers. And we talked about him a little bit on the show last year in the very last category, last week on the very last category, talking about the wild card section with the trade of Gavin Lux. I think it's pretty obvious that the Dodgers have a lot of confidence in signing Kim to be their close to everyday second baseman. I also believe that, they're going to want a tandem up the middle of Mookie Betts and whoever's playing second base to be doing that as often as possible and not mixing and matching that position, not mixing and matching those double play opportunities so they can create a rapport and create, long-standing relationship throughout the course of the season. Of course, there's going to be some platoons, there are going to be some injuries, what have you. But wherever they can have consistency, I think is going to be important. And, from all accounts, this is what Kim is supposed to do. He's supposed to hit for average. He's supposed to add a little bit of speed to the base pass and on the ball as well. And gonna, be a positive addition at second base defensively. So I think that those at-bats can go up a lot higher than the 400. Maybe doesn't hit the 500 in his first year with the Dodgers, but, stranger things have happened. And if, it's hard to project the, players coming from, other leagues and overseas in their first year. But again, if this is what he's, we're not trying to project power. We're not projecting speed here. We're just projecting how well the man hits the ball. From all accounts, that's what he does.
Yep. I tend to agree with everything you just said. I do have one concern, and that is Zips, and they are projected for a 217 batting average.
That's a lot lower.
Right. And ATC, most are going to agree with the projections that have him higher. Yes, Steamer has him at almost 280. They have him at 279. And ATC, which aggregates several projection systems, is up in that range at 265. So more projections have him high than low. The reason this sticks out to me is we're talking about a player coming over from the KBO that we haven't seen play anywhere else. And Zips uses player comps in their projections.
Oh.
So players that have been similar to Hyseung Kim lead Zips to believe he's going to hit 217. I would tend to make my decisions based on, at least ATC's 265, if not Steamer's 280. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, it makes me realize that players similar to Hyseung Kim lead a projection system to have him batting down near 200.
That's scary.
It's something to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else then? If you just scared me away from Hyseung Kim, who else should I be looking at in the middle infield to help my batting average?
I'm picking a guy to help my batting average that I believe hit 217 last season, if I'm remembering correctly. And we've talked about him a little bit and why that I'm still okay. I think it was all injury related. I'm really high on what Thairo Estrada can do for the Colorado Rockies this season. as long as he remains in the lineup, which he will start there. And I think if he performs, he remains there all season, no matter what anybody else does. And I think he will. I fully believe, we've talked about this, that his 2024 struggles were completely injury related. And what's awesome to me is not only do projection systems tend to agree with that, but at least a couple of them have him bouncing back completely in batting average, all the way back, similar to his 271 that he hit in 2023. Now, I know, as we talked earlier in the show, only 364 at bats in 2024. So that is taken into account in the projections. But as far as the average he actually hit, that 217, sure, I am certain that the at bats are taken into account as well. But 2024 gets weighted a lot more than 2023, and even more than 2022. And have him projected for a 265-ish batting average pretty much across the board on these projection systems that are publicly available on Fangraphs after hitting 217 last season. I loved seeing that, because this is what I already felt, that 273, 260, 271, he hit the 3 prior seasons. I feel like he's jumping right back there as well.
Nice. All right, we got a couple options here at the outfield position, just because you need a lot more of them, or you need to at least keep your eye on a lot more of them for possible injuries. Lead us off here, Kevin, in the outfield. Who you have your eye on?
So when it comes to outfielders, we're almost always going to be looking at a platoon player in this range. That's because outfielders, so many of them platoon, that outfielders that don't platoon are rostered. So that's first off. But I think that Matt Vierling, I know Detroit, it is on the upswing, and in many people's minds and many Tigers fans' minds, they're probably like, when are we going to get Matt Vierling out of our lineup? And I don't think you want to get Matt Vierling out of your lineup. He's performed well. He's going to get you the double-digit home runs in 500 some at bats. He had 518 last season to get to his 16 home runs with a 257 batting average, 261 the season prior. He's projected for 250 or over by all the projection systems, career 259. We're to this point when remember, I was kind of cautioning against this earlier in the show. 250 batting average does hurt us. Not as much as 240, but 250 is, if it's below your target, it's hurting you. But he's been closer to that 260 number the last 2 seasons, actually exceeded it one of the 2, with the volatility and batting average. Mid 250s is close enough in projections for me, especially when we're talking a guy off the waiver wire. And he's projected for over 500 plate appearances across the board in this improved Detroit lineup.
Yeah, I just remember the times where I was really enamored with Matt Vierling when he was with Philadelphia coming up. You're like, oh, if he just, he found his way into the lineup more often because of an injury. And then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, he's getting traded to, or he's getting sent over to Detroit. What role does he play? That's great, because at the time, Detroit's really kind of up and coming. There's not really a lot of competition. I mean, it just didn't fan out on a more of a regular basis than I think a lot of people were hoping or expecting. But he's just been kind of consistently, reliable across the board when you needed him, and he was always there when you needed him, on the wire. That is, and so nice call out there. He definitely made my list here for PLV projections as well, with all the requirements in here. They've got him at 471 at bats with a 256 batting average throughout the course of the season. But I do like the dual eligibility as well between third base, outfield. So you can throw him in a corner in a pinch as well. I had a couple. Actually, I was literally, while you were talking, I was going back and forth with what pick I was going to go. I mean, I could just go and be like, hey, Ryan O'Hearn, outfield eligible. Fine, I already talked about him, but I'll move to somebody else. Sal Frelick of Milwaukee is the next best option in average based on PLV projections at 259 with a 428 at bats projected, going at ADP of 356. Yeah, he's in a. The thing is that he's in a projected platoon in Milwaukee with another player I really like. In the fact that both of these players, Frelick, the one I'll spend most time on, is the fact that he can still get you double-digit steals throughout the course of the season, and so the fact that that's gonna, his speed is going to create more opportunities for him to, slap in, steal a couple of extra base hits throughout the season as well. So, Sal Frelick in Milwaukee. And then the other guy I was leaning toward at one point or another, and the reason I started thinking about him even more is I'll give a shout out to Uncle Ted in the chat. Matt Wallner over in Minnesota. Yes, we know of their tendencies to platoon pretty much anybody and everybody in Minnesota. Kevin, you just talked about it. But Matt Wallner was, when he, like, there's a reason he's like the Jock Peterson of Minnesota. It's like when Wallner was in there against the correct-handed pitcher, he was doing very good things. And so I think that this is a player that you could keep an eye on for when you are trying to play the right matchups. Where'd he go? He was I don't even know. You know what? I don't even think he made my list. So I was just thinking of him, and then Uncle Ted, you willed it into existence. So I appreciate the call out there. The other Minnesota option that PLV projection has as an option would be Trevor Larnach at 426 at bats, with a 250, again in that 250 range for for batting average. But so I will lean towards Sal Frelick just because of the higher batting average projection and the double, possibly 20 steals if he can get enough plate appearances throughout the course of the season.
Yeah, I like both those lefties in Minnesota. I would love to see at least one of them maybe get an opportunity for more at bats. One of them might. I mean, I know they have both Harrison Bader and Austin Martin as right-handed bats in the outfield. But if one of I don't think they would ever leave them both in, or at least not very often. But if one of them takes off and really cuts their strikeout rate, they both have strikeout issues. If one of Larnach or Wallner cuts their strikeout rate, they could be in the lineup most days, and that would be nice, because this is turning out to be a pretty nice lineup that the Twins have put together. And yeah, I think either one of those two. The reason Wallner didn't come up for you, he just barely doesn't make it for ADP. At least over the past couple of weeks, he doesn't. Otherwise, he would have qualified on your sheet there.
277 career batting average through 393 at bats against righties for Wallner. So just the epitome of the platoon. And it's hard to like really label these young guys as quote platoon players, because if you just don't give them the opportunity, they can't dig themselves out of the hole you put them in, right? But I mean, Wallner's had about 100 career at bats at the major league level against righties, and that's a nice, cool 144 in that time frame. So not something I'm expecting him to dig himself out of anytime soon. Outfield option, Kevin. Who you got?
I went with Matt Vierling for outfield.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we went that direction already. The last category here that I put on here, it's a little bit different one, is because we end up talking about these players all the time in this category, players that have a lot of eligibility across the board as far as positions go, because that can not only give them more versatility on your fantasy teams, but also more versatility. That means they have more versatility in real life, giving them more opportunities to play. Is there anybody that stood out to you? We already named a couple of players that have dual eligibility.
Right.
What about triple eligibility?
I don't think the guy I picked has triple. I picked another guy with 2 eligibilities. I went with Ernie Clement, and the reason I chose Ernie Clement is I don't think he's going to get as many at bats as he did last year. Now that seems crazy to to choose somebody for that reason, but I think he's going to get more than what he's projected for. I think he kind of splits the difference here. He actually got in nearly 140 games um, for Toronto last season. Now, Andres Jimenez coming in, that's going to limit some infield. They have uh, who was I thinking of? Oh, Davis Schneider, small side platoon, possibly. And so that you never know. He could take some at bats from Clement, both of them hitting from the right side once in a while, if the Blue Jays want to slide people around. But I think he may be nearly the everyday third baseman the way this is looking right now for Toronto. Even with the additions they've made with Santander and Andres Jimenez, I think Ernie Clement is the third baseman for Toronto. So he could exceed the playing time projections, and the batting average is typically there for us. So Ernie Clement, for me, this is I'm expecting more playing time than he's being projected for right now, in spite of the additions that Toronto has made. Because if you can get a 260 batting average off the waiver wire, he's eligible at a corner and in the outfield. I'm in.
Nice. See that it's like having the dual eligibility that also gives you an at like a triple eligibility at the corner. Is great. So the two guys that I was targeting, I feel like I've mentioned him enough, so I'm not going to go into any detail with Isaiah kind of falafel, especially with the Tommy Pham projection of being leadoff.
Right.
That's going to knock him all the way down. But he does have the triple eligibility still, and he's still projected to be in the lineup pretty much every day for the Pirates, albeit at the bottom of the lineup instead of the top of the lineup. But his teammate Spencer Horwitz is somebody that I might be keeping an eye on. Even I don't think Tommy Pham entering the conversation really affects what was going to happen with Horwitz in general. First base, second base eligibility. Nice to have the corner in the middle infield option here. So you've got 5 positions you can throw him in your lineup in the NFBC roster. But projected by PLV to have a 264 average on the year, just shy of 400 at bats because of that projected platoon. But I mean, is the guy who hit, 277, I think it was last year, or he's projected to also by all the other projections to hit closer to that 270 plus mark as well for 2025. Like what Spencer Horwitz obviously did in Toronto, and being in a situation in Pittsburgh where he could very well just break, he could still steal some at bats against some lefties as well. As being the everyday against righties for the Pirates at second base, I think is going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, it's not surprising seeing the Bat X be lowest on his batting average projection, but Steamer is typically very conservative when it comes to batting average, and they're the ones there at 267. Love to see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've talked about Jake Cronenworth as well. First base, second base. Also, PLV got him in around the 250, 253 mark for batting average. So, like to have the middle infield, corner infield options there as well.
I can't bring him up for batting average, but if you're in an OBP league, don't let the Polanco signing scare you away from Dylan Moore. It sounds like Polanco is strictly third baseman, so Moore will still be doing his thing.
I was waiting to see if somehow you'd find a way. I mean, with the 4 position eligibility, he fits this category.
And he walks so much, his batting average doesn't hurt you as much as you think it might, but it does still hurt.
Yeah. PLV's got him for 393 at bats, but 462 plate appearances through the course of the season. So that 209 hits just a little bit lighter.
Little less.
Yeah, just a little bit less. But anyway, all right, a lot of not great but decent options. Fun. Some of them pretty fun options.
More than
At
I
the end.
thought there would be
Yeah.
when we set out here. I thought we were going to be talking about a lot of 244s won't hurt you after I just said it will.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we found 255 to 270 guys even. Yeah.
I mean, these are the type of players too that if you are weighting your bench with a 5-2 or even a 6-1, these are the types of players you want to be the player that
Stashing.
that
Yep.
that you can
Your
plug in.
team streamers as far as hitters go.
Yep.
Yes.
So Kevin, with all that in mind and anything else you want to consider, I'll leave us out with another nugget as we enter February. And we get into true baseball season. By the time you're done listening to this, it is probably on the cusp of being true baseball season because the other sport will be completely done.
Yeah, that's amazing. So enjoy your Sunday. Enjoy whatever you do to hang out for the game. Absolutely have a good time. We have actual FAAB coming up pretty soon. So I things I talk about all the time, right? That I am starting to remind myself. Sent Jenny Butler had a quick DM conversation with her a week or two ago, thanking her for the notebook idea. I'd been going through my notebooks. It's that time. Okay, what notes was I taking through this off season that I already forgot about? A lot of them. One example, Kyle Bland, when he was here, told us bat speed is uh, it stabilizes very, very quickly, right? So if we want to compare 2025 bat speed to 2024's, because 2024 is all we have right now, the one series, he said. So right away, as soon as the season gets going, it's something we can start looking at, especially if you think, oh, is he hurt? He looks slow. Well, you can compare it to last season right away. Just an example. I've been going through my notebooks, looking at things. So all the little things add up to a big thing. What I really want to talk about is I think we got to get a 12-team listener league going. We have we got our 15 completed, our first 15. We probably have almost enough on the waiting list for the first 12 to nearly fill it. But if you're listening on Sunday, hit us up because we might be able to get it going this weekend.
Yeah, I'll talk to Jeff and we'll get that going. A lot of the Earth leagues are going on.
Yeah, going this weekend.
Next weekend as well. So
Yeah, I think ours is the 23rd, if I'm remembering right, is TARF.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much all of them happening right in February. Want to make sure they're not overlapping with with Tau and with with the main events and the other big drafts that a lot of the players that play in the Earth leagues play in. But so you're going to see a lot of draft boards. If you're still watching the Twitter sphere or on Blue Sky or wherever, you're going to start seeing a lot of draft boards if you haven't been already. So keep an eye out for those because those are always fun. All right. Well, with all that and everything else, we that's going to conclude it for episode 201. We're over the 200 mark, so I can start saying all these episodes with 2 instead of a 1 now for at least the next 98 versions of these. But that's going to do it for episode 201 of On the Wire. On behalf of Kevin Hasting, I am Adam Howe. We bid you goodbye.